My daughter deserted me during my battle with cancer. 2 years later, she reappeared, assuming I was dying and expecting to inherit everything I own. I'm a 56-year-old man. It all started with a cough. Just a little tickle in my throat that wouldn't go away. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, I was always the picture of health. But when the cough persisted for weeks, accompanied by night sweats and unexplained weight loss, my wife insisted I see a doctor. I'll never forget the day we got the results. The doctor's face was grim as he delivered the news: stage 3 lung cancer. The room seemed to spin around me as I tried to process what I was hearing. My wife's hand tightened around mine, her quiet sobs the only sound in the sterile office. "We'll fight this," she whispered, her voice thick with determination and fear. "Together." And fight we did. The next few months were a blur of chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, and more doctor's appointments than I could count. I lost my hair, dropped weight until I barely recognized myself in the mirror, and spent most days too nauseated to eat. But through it all, my wife was my rock. She held my hand through every treatment, researched alternative therapies late into the night, and never once let me give up hope. Our friends rallied around us, bringing meals, offering rides to appointments, and providing much-needed moments of normalcy in the chaos our lives had become. Even my son, who lived across the country, flew in every other weekend to help out and lift our spirits. But there was one person noticeably absent from our support system: my daughter. When we first got the diagnosis, I called her myself. "Sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've got some bad news. The doctors found cancer." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Oh, that's terrible, Dad. I'm so sorry." I waited for more, for her to ask about treatment options, to say she'd come visit, anything. But all I got was awkward silence. "Well," I finally said, "your mom and I could really use your support right now. Maybe you could come stay with us for a while?" Another pause. I don't know, Dad. Work is really busy right now, and I've got this big project coming up. I'll try to visit soon, okay?" That soon never came. As the weeks turned into months, my daughter's excuses piled up. She was always too busy, too stressed, too caught up in her own life to spare even a phone call for her dying father. At first, I made excuses for her. She was young, I told myself. Maybe she was just scared, unable to face the reality of her father's mortality. But as time went on and her absence became more glaring, I couldn't ignore the hurt and anger that began to build. One particularly rough day after chemo, I broke down. "Why won't she come?" I sobbed into my wife's shoulder. "Doesn't she care that I might not have much time left?" My wife just held me, her own tears falling silently. She had no answers, no comfort to offer. The truth was, we were both baffled and heartbroken by our daughter's behavior. As my treatment progressed, something unexpected happened. Against all odds, I started to improve. The tumors began to shrink, my energy levels slowly returned, and for the first time since my diagnosis, the doctors started using words like remission and recovery. It should have been the happiest time of my life, and in many ways, it was. But my daughter's abandonment cast a long shadow over my joy. Even as I got better physically, the emotional wound of her absence festered. Then, about a year after my initial diagnosis, we got the news we'd been praying for. I was cancer-free. The day we left the hospital with my clean bill of health, my wife threw a surprise party. Our house was filled with friends and family, all celebrating my second chance at life. As I looked around at the smiling faces, I felt a pang in my chest. The one face I longed to see wasn't there. I had called my daughter to share the good news, but once again, I'd gotten her voicemail. She never called back. Life went on. I threw myself into living, determined to make the most of the time I'd been given. I retired from my job and started a small consulting business. My wife and I traveled, crossing items off our bucket list one by one. We spoiled our grandkids rotten and hosted weekly dinners for our friends and family. But there was always an empty chair at our table, a hole in our hearts where our daughter should have been. Then, almost 2 years to the day after my initial diagnosis, she showed up on our doorstep. I was in the garden when I heard the car pull up. Curious, I walked around to the front of the house, only to stop dead in my tracks. There she was, looking exactly as she had the last time I'd seen her, right down to the nervous smile she wore when she wanted something. "Dad," she said, her voice wavering. I heard about your condition. I'm so sorry I haven't been around. I couldn't bear to see you sick." I stood there, rooted to the spot, 1,000 emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to rush forward and embrace her, to forgive everything, and just be grateful to have my little girl back. But another part, a harder, more cynical part, born from 2 years of abandonment, held me back. "My condition?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "And what condition would that be?" She looked confused. Your cancer. I heard it had gotten worse, that you didn't have much time left." And there it was, the real reason for her sudden reappearance. She thought I was dying, and no doubt she was here to secure her place in my will. I felt a cold anger settle over me. "Why don't you come inside?" I said, turning without waiting for her response. "We have a lot to talk about." As we sat in the living room, the air thick with tension, I studied my daughter. She fidgeted under my gaze, her eyes darting around the room, landing anywhere but on me. "So," I finally said, breaking the silence, "you heard I was dying." She flinched at my blunt words. Yes. A friend of a friend mentioned it. "Dad, I'm so sorry I haven't been here. I was just so scared, and I didn't know how to handle it, and..." I held up a hand, cutting off her rambling excuses. "Let me ask you something. In the 2 years since my diagnosis, did you ever once pick up the phone to check on me? Did you ever send so much as a text to your mother to see how she was holding up?" She had the grace to look ashamed. No, I should have, I know. I couldn't." "Couldn't?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You couldn't spare 5 minutes to call your dying father? You couldn't be bothered to support your mother while she watched her husband waste away from chemo?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Dad, please. I know I messed up. I want to make it right. I want to be here for you now, in your final days." "Final days?" I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping me. "Is that what you think this is? You've come to hold my hand on my deathbed, to make sure you're in my good graces when I kick the bucket?" Confusion flickered across her face. What? Aren't you?" I stood up abruptly, anger propelling me to my feet. "No, I'm not dying. I've been in remission for over a year. Not that you'd know that, since you couldn't be bothered to check in." The color drained from her face. But I heard." "You heard wrong," I snapped. "Or more likely, you heard what you wanted to hear." "What, did you think you'd swing by, shed a few crocodile tears, and walk away with a fat inheritance?" She burst into tears then, great heaving sobs that would have broken my heart 2 years ago. Now they just fueled my anger. "Do you have any idea what it was like?" I demanded. "Lying in a hospital bed, puking my guts out from chemo, wondering if I'd live to see another Christmas? Do you know how many times I asked for you, how many times your mother made excuses for why you weren't there?" She tried to speak, but I was on a roll now, 2 years of pent-up hurt and anger pouring out of me. "We needed you," I said, my voice breaking. "I needed my daughter. And you couldn't be bothered to show up until you thought there was something in it for you." "That's not true," she cried. "I love you, Dad. I was just scared." "Scared?" I repeated incredulously. "You think you were scared? Try hearing a doctor tell you that you have months to live. Try watching your wife cry herself to sleep every night because she's terrified of losing you. That's scary. What you did wasn't fear. It was selfishness, pure and simple." She collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take her in my arms like I did when she was little. But the hurt was too raw, the betrayal too deep. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "What? No, Dad, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I cut her off. "How you abandoned your family when we needed you most? How you only showed up when you thought there was something to gain? I don't need explanations. I need a daughter who gives a damn about me when I'm not on my deathbed." She stood up shakily, tears still streaming down her face. "Dad, please. I love you. I'm sorry. What can I do to make this right?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt a deep sadness settle over me. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. Somewhere along the line, she'd become a stranger to me. "I don't know if you can make this right," I said honestly. "But I know it won't happen today. Go home. Think about your choices, about the kind of person you want to be. If you decide you want to be part of this family again, really be part of it, through good times and bad, then we can talk. But I won't be manipulated or guilted into forgiving you just because you showed up at the 11th hour. She opened her mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. With a final, pleading look, she turned and walked out the door. As I watched her car pull away, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Anger, hurt, disappointment, but also a strange sense of relief. For 2 years I'd carried the weight of her abandonment, questioning what I'd done wrong. Why my own child couldn't be there for me. Now I realized the problem wasn't with me, it was with her. My wife found me still standing at the window long after our daughter had gone. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her cheek against my back. "You did the right thing," she murmured. I turned to face her, seeing my own pain reflected in her eyes. "Did I?" "She's still our daughter," she nodded sadly. "She is, but she's also an adult who made her choices. Now she has to live with the consequences." As we stood there, holding each other, I thought about family, about love, and about the hard choices we sometimes have to make. I didn't know what the future held for me and my daughter. Maybe she'd take this as a wake-up call and make real changes in her life. Maybe she'd retreat back into her own world, content to be the fair-weather daughter she'd become. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a doormat. I'd fought too hard for my life to waste it on people who only valued me when they thought I was dying. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more tears, more hard conversations, more soul-searching on all sides. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was truly living, not just surviving. As I hugged my wife tighter, I silently thanked whatever higher power had given me this second chance. Not just at life, but at understanding what and who really mattered. Life's too short for fake relationships and conditional love. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same. And sometimes the family you choose is more real than the one you're born into.